I'm not gonna lie, I wanted to just talk about something completely different. However, I got really distracted watching a different channel called The Antibot and her husband Drew and his channel. So I got distracted because on their channel they talked about a particular singer, I believe, of a band called Skillet named John, I forgot his name. John Cooper. So the thing is, I actually watched John Cooper and Skillet in general live when I was a teenager. So I went to church every week from when I was born to when I was 18. And every other Wednesday for different groups. So it started with Jesus Company, then Confirmation, and then Youth Group. Youth Group, it pretty much just meant teenagers. So when we were teenagers, we went to an amusement park and we watched a bunch of different Christian bands. I actually mentioned it before on my channel when playing a particular video game. I don't remember when, but I did. However, the thing is, I didn't actually know anything about these bands. I didn't grow up in a very musical household. Not even really Christian music, but that was majority of it. However, what was really interesting is people actually really like Skillet. I believe even some like non-Christians or not super Christian people liked Skillet, which was really interesting. So yeah, I got to see them live. However, I didn't really know anything about them, and I didn't even recognize him when I saw him on the Anti-Boss channel. However, I wanted this explanation because it will kind of, I guess, feed into my credentials later of why I'm talking about this. So the guy, John Cooper, wrote a book back in 2000 and, it was released in 2023. I don't know when he technically wrote it, but I'm assuming around that time. The book is called Wimpy, Weak, and Woke: How Truth Can Save America from Utopian Destruction. I didn't realize that was even the full title, I'm going to be honest. I only knew it as Wimpy, Weak, and Woke when I first looked into it until I started writing for this. So already we're like, okay. But let's continue. The reason why I'm already hesitant is first insulting people with wimpy and weak, but we'll kind of talk about that later. But also calling people woke, I'm going to be honest, I don't know. Even when I first heard it, I'm like, he probably doesn't know what woke means, and then reading this, he doesn't know what woke means. Woke in his mind just means anything left of where he is. But anyways, this book is wild. Like, legitimately, I open it to any page and there's something to talk about. I know this because I literally did that with my friend when I was talking to them, because I got so enamored by this book that I'm like, I need to talk to someone, and I talked to my friend for hours of just being like, I'm so sorry. This is it. They didn't even grow up Christian, so I don't even know if they really understood what I was talking about or like where I'm coming from, but it is what it is. Anyways, I didn't buy this book, by the way. What I did is go onto Amazon and look at their free sample, but the free sample I thought was going to be a few pages was the first 2 chapters plus the prologue, which, by the way, he calls the pre-show, because he's a band member. I did label what pages I got each of these quotes from that I'm going to talk about from him. However, I did also notice the pages weren't consistent, so on my phone in the preview, the pages were different than on my computer. They weren't labeled, but I assumed the pre-cut pages would have been the same, but they weren't. So they're not going to line up with anything besides unless you use the computer, like an actual PC, to look at the sample. If you use your phone, the pages are going to be different, and if you probably have the book, the pages are going to be different. I also do want to mention, because it is the sample, John Cooper writes with sources. So in theory, you could look at his sources where he gets things. However, I can't, because those sources don't work in the sample. And if you actually buy the physical book, or what I was thinking of renting it from the library, wouldn't work. I guess borrow is the word I was looking for. I was going to borrow it from the library. But that wouldn't really work given, for sources, because the physical book also wouldn't have the source linked. So I can't actually double check any of his sources, which is a huge thing that personally, when I look into people I disagree with, is one of the, or even people I agree with, you always look at the source. Where is this coming from? Is this a good source? Who made this source? Why did they make this source? I can't do any of that. So I will source my things, but I can't ever confirm nor deny any of his claims that he does have actual citations for. Also, before we even get started again, he exclusively uses the word America to mean the USA. I understand that. However, I'm going to be changing the words to USA because he obviously isn't talking about South America, Central America, or even all of North America. He is talking about the United States. We know this. It's just something I know people do. I just want to kind of correct that a little bit to make it clearer exactly who and where we're talking about. So, like I said, John Cooper, he is a member of the band Skillet, which is a Christian rock band. Also, like I said, this prologue isn't called a prologue, it's called a pre-show, which I also want to mention. I didn't read the first time through because on my phone it actually completely skipped the pre-show. It just completely skipped over his pre. And it just threw me into chapter 1. So I did go back and read it, which he kind of writes like I talk. He kind of talks in a circle, re-bringing up certain things over and over again, but slightly different. I do this. I know this. I try to edit it out, but I do know I know this about me. It's a problem. So this beginning, some of it was repetitive. So some of it I know I can talk about better later. That's just how he wrote it. And also, no, that's how I speak. So, oops, I'm trying to fix it. I'm fixing it. I'm trying to make it good and smooth, but here we go. So he starts the book off with talking about how he was depressed after his mom died in his teen years, and how he started making music, trying to bring hope to people that felt hopeless, just like God brought hope to him. The thing is, as a teenager who is going through my own struggles, and going through what I went through, and even throughout my my kid years, my childhood, this is not actually a big complaint or something, but it's really interesting because for him, God brought him so much hope, which is good. All good, but it's really interesting that growing up in Christianity, I didn't have that. It was actually really interesting because as a teenager, my biggest fear, like a kid slash young teen, my biggest fear was hell. Because as a trans person, I was told just by being who I was would send me to hell. Just something I can't physically change would make me suffer hell for eternity, which coupled with such a bad childhood, which already felt like hell, I didn't get hope from that situation at all. So it's really interesting. And this isn't a complaint, and that definitely isn't saying, oh, he needs to not be Christian. It's really interesting that these two things, when I saw him playing, it wasn't hope I felt in God. And not like because of him. I meant like in those years. So it's this weird, that was interesting and not really the point. It also brings up his backstory of how he found God, which I do think it's important or interesting to note. He found God in his teenage years when I stopped going to church at 18. So it's kind of a twist. we're kind of like not mirroring the opposite. We're like opposite ends of the Christian experience. I don't know. Now, already on page 4, we get to this quote, which he's talking about in a negative point of view, by the way. Quote, bring society into an era of human perfection, bliss, equality, prosperity, and spiritual oneness. Now, he doesn't fully lay out who he's talking about besides saying, again, quote, the media, the entertainment industry, activists posing as journalists, and the woke church. So I'm guessing he's meaning anyone more progressive than him, like progressive left. And as a member of the left here in the US, I will say two things. One, no one is asking for spiritual oneness. No one is saying we have to perfectly align spiritually. People have different religions. That's totally okay. That's kind of a big thing where it's like separating church from government is that anyone can have their personal religion, but having that's not shouldn't be forced on through the government to people. So no one is asking for these to no one's asking you to change your religion. And like I said, even with my first point, I'm not saying that you should change. I'm saying that's really interesting that we experienced, the Bible and Christianity, but having it through different lenses. No one is telling you to change, some people, but in general, people are often saying that yes, you can have your religion and that's totally okay, but let's, like, your religion isn't more important than someone else's, and someone else's religion isn't more important than yours. So, you and everyone can practice their religion safely and without judgment. And two, what is wrong with bliss, equality, and prosperity? What is wrong with trying to work for a better tomorrow? As we continue, you'll see John doesn't always explain why he thinks something is inherently bad. However, he does touch on what he means by human perfection a bit later. Anyways, this all just leads to being anti-cancel culture and calls it bullying. My washing machine just ended. He goes on talking about how unless you're anti-Trump, or an extension anti-evangelicalism and conservatism, he goes on to saying that you would be bullied for this, which, by the way, that isn't bullying. People can be like, I don't like this thing, or I don't want to support you if you support this thing. That's not inherently bullying. Yes, it can lead to bullying, but just by itself, that's not bullying. You don't have to support someone who doesn't agree with you, or you don't agree with them. That's not bullying. And it's just not putting your money into people that you don't agree with. You probably do that yourself, where you're just like, no, I don't like this brand, so I don't support this, or I don't support that. Especially John here, who openly is against certain things, and he explicitly talks about later on, which is again something in chapter 1, he talks about putting his money where he believes his money should go to. He believes in the exact same thing. But if I disagree, let's say, with Skillet as a band, if I don't buy their stuff, which I have never done. I went to one show, never bought anything from them, don't know any of their music. However, if I decided, nay, actually, psych, I don't want to put my money into this anymore, that's not bullying. It's just not. But note, if someone says something like, I don't like your belief, therefore I don't think you should have bodily autonomy, then yeah, that's different. Because that's the difference of someone saying, I don't like your belief and I'm not going to see you on tour, versus saying, I don't support or I don't believe their beliefs, therefore they shouldn't be allowed to tour. You see that those are different. I'm not going to support your tour, you shouldn't be able to do this thing. Different things. So here's something that I know other people have called out Christian's trademark, saying he calls anyone that's not a Christian a moral anarchist, because he believes morals should be set by God and God alone, and without that there is no rule following. People have their own morals. But it's really ironic because he himself says he disagrees with other Christians. It's really interesting that when it comes to him and his morals, those are the correct ones. That's the correct, solid, concrete line. But everyone else isn't there. But they're following the same Bible. Also, everyone's morals are essentially a line in the sand. You change it when you learn and change your perspective. That's not a bad thing. Learning and changing your views are, or can be, inherently good. It can be bad. You can slip into, people talk about the alt-right pipeline, or the turf pipeline, or whatever, a pipeline. People do change this line of morality to different places. And it doesn't inherently mean it's bad, because people can also learn to be better. I have known people that were super transphobic, homophobic, and are much better now. When I was growing up, somebody in my family, white, would say the N-word when I was very young, and then learned, hey, whoa, that's messed up, and he's just stopped doing it, and has since been like, no, this is really messed up. And I guess He just learned and changed for the better. I'm not saying he's perfect, dear God, no. But it changed and for the better. His morals had changed. Morals change. That's the whole thing about humans is they can learn and adapt and change. It's a good thing. Which, by the way, before anyone being like, oh, well, changing, like, whatever, I don't know. He changed when he became a Christian. He probably changed a lot. If he didn't grow up Christian, which it doesn't sound like he did. It sounds like he found God after his mom died when he was a teenager. A lot of people change their point of view on certain things, like sex before marriage or outside of marriage. Honestly, that's the one that he kind of talks about later. So I actually don't know what other really strong beliefs he has. But things like that, where those probably changed. Obviously, which is another thing, is when it's like, oh, moral anarchist. A lot of people actually have the same morals, like, hey, murdering is bad, point blank period. Like, that one's pretty set in stone, and it says and agrees with that in the Bible. But the one thing that a lot of people disagree on, the most common big thing, is sex, which is what we'll talk about later. He talks about it later, so we'll talk about it later. Also on page 6, in the same page, he mentions the introduction of calling people the hard left. So I guess instead of like the far right, it's the hard left, which I found very funny. I guess I heard it before, but I don't know why it kind of tickled me. My clothes are now in the dryer, so if you hear my dryer, it's okay. It's just my dryer. We get over it. Okay, so here is our first complete double standard. This is kind of like, this take doesn't mean me, it means these people. Like, I'm excluded. He talks about third-way-ers, which, by the way, are not a sex thing. He means people that, quote, being above divisiveness of choosing sides. But John Cooper here started the book talking about how he didn't talk about politics and how he didn't want to be vocal when choosing a side when talking about Trump. It's a complete double standard. You want to not talk about it, but when other people try to be neutral, you're against them. But you also talk about how neutrality doesn't exist because people are against that. So, and people will bully and cancel you for it. He also says that these third-way-ers, not three-wayers, third-way-ers. So he talks about how they favor the left and throw evangelicals under the bus. However, John himself didn't speak up for what he believed in order to not upset what he viewed as the left. You yourself chose a third way. You yourself chose not to stand your ground and vocally talk about what you believed in. John also says, quote, I still thought I could stay out of the fight. This was after this point. This was on page 9. So he says choosing this third way is, this a kind of slimy, oh, you're throwing us evangelicals under the bus. But you yourself didn't stand up and go, no, this is what I believe in, this is what I think, this is what's up. You're judging other people despite not doing the thing that you yourself are saying that is bad. And then, of course, he suddenly jumps into talking about abortion. No, we had absolutely no lead up to this. It just straight into abortion. So I said it once and I'll say it 1,000 times. If you or your religion are against abortion, then you yourself don't have to get an abortion. There you go. We handled it. Settled. We're done. Case closed. Of course it's not. Let's continue. There are just so many reasons why someone needs an abortion or would want an abortion. You do not get a say. You, nor any Christian or anyone else, gets a say in if someone else can or should get an abortion. Because again, there are so many reasons why someone needs an abortion. You don't get a say if someone is allowed to get one or not. That just isn't how this should work. However, that's not the point here. So let's move on. He mentioned things like Christians adopt at over twice the rate of other Americans. Pause. Do you all remember the Jewish couple that got denied the right to adopt because I think the organization was Christian and they said that they didn't align with their beliefs? If there's a lot of Christian adoption organizations that discriminate against other people that aren't Christians, of course, then Christians have a higher level of adoption. It just makes sense. Also remember that in certain states, it is completely legal to discriminate against people based on religion, sexuality, and gender identity. Also, marriage status. I didn't write that, but that is a thing that people can get denied just based on marital status. Like, if you are a single person, you can get denied. Versus a married couple. Versus, again, a straight married couple versus a gay married couple. Of course, it makes sense that if you can be discriminative based on religion, then Also, Christians are the majority of the United States. It's a good chunk of America, of the US, that are Christian. So of course Christians adopt at a higher rate if there's that many more Christians in the US than non-Christians. He also says that the pleasure from sex is secondary and should be enjoyed within marriage between one man and one woman. Here's the thing, John. Here's the thing. Not everyone is Christian. And despite you thinking they aren't real Christians, not even all Christians believe that point either. And you yourself believing this wouldn't be a problem besides the fact that you are against others going against those things. You have no right to tell people to follow your pinpoint religious rules. I also don't want to be weird, but I'm going to anyways because I really want to send this point home. I want to point out that you only have 2 kids, but you've been married 28 years. So, have you ever had sex for fun without the meaning of getting pregnant? Or your wife pregnant? If yes, aren't you going against your own point here? That the feeling, the pleasure is secondary to the whole point of sex being to have a child? So if you ever had sex without, even with your wife, without the express point of getting pregnant, aren't you yourself going against your own point here? On page 11, he says, when you're not having sex to make babies, the rates of self-reported loneliness, depression, anxiety, and suicide are exponentially increasing. Here's the thing, there's no source there. There's none. He doesn't even write a source, not even that I could look it up anyways, but there is no source. So, I want to know where he got that claim. I want to know, where's that from? Where's that from? Because that's wild. Because again, not even all married couples have sex to have babies. Not all Christian married couples do that. You're not always looking for another baby. If every Christian was doing that, they would end up like the Duggar family with 20 kids and counting. There is that this claim is unhinged. It's wild. It's just, it clearly is incorrect. It so clearly is incorrect. I didn't actually write a note for this, but there is the quote that he wrote this, quote, "If life has no purpose other than personal happiness, then human worth is a subjective metric." I didn't have anything to say about that. Like I said, it's just wild because even in Christianity, yeah, you're supposed to follow God, and yeah, it was could be hard, but at the end of the day, you were still trying to be happy, just in the correct way. It's wild. That is such a weird thing for me. He also goes on to say how God is the only way, and how instead of calling others to God's designs, many Christians are now fighting for everyone's right to do whatever brings them subjective happiness. Here's the thing. I didn't really mention it before. So I grew up I grew up Lutheran. I believe that is evangelicalism. He talks about evangelicalism, so I'm assuming he also follows one of those types. So probably not the exact same. I grew up in church, so I mainly was taught what I was taught, not the differences between different Christianities. So I don't know the difference. However, I was taught I remember explicitly being told, you can preach the word of God, but if they do not listen, you move on. You do not force people into Christianity. This is backed in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're all pretty much the same quote in Matthew 10:14, Mark 6:11, Luke 9:5. Let me look at the exact quote, sorry. I didn't copy it, apparently. Here is Mark 6:11. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. Now, do I agree that it should be, against them? And it goes on saying that they will be destroyed worse than other places and how it's all bad and all. Is that good? No, I do not agree with that. The idea of other people being less than just because they aren't Christian or don't listen to you is not good. However, it does say to just leave. I didn't write it here, but I'm going to actually just look it up real quick. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you into pieces. Now, I was taught that don't throw your pearls of wisdom before swine. So essentially, don't waste trying to, again, not great, non-Christians, which is the swine. Don't be throwing your Christianity at them, kind of let them be. That's the whole point that I learned from that. I'm not actually super positive. I didn't super look into it besides just now. But both of these quotes are saying that you should just kind of move on. You do not force people into Christianity. You offer Christianity and you move on, or else it can backfire on you and your Christianity gets muddled. Again, not great. There's reasons, there's a lot of things wrong with the Bible, but it is wild that I was taught such a particular thing, and here is John going the other way with it and being like, you have to follow the rules. You can't do whatever the hell you want. The heck you gotta follow Christianity, like what I think is good. But that isn't even what the Bible says. I also want to emphasize that John Cooper has not yet quoted the Bible in this book. I know we're only like 13 pages in, but the whole point is that he believes that the Bible is the only way. If you try to find any morals or anything of how to navigate in the world outside the Bible, you are wrong. Yet, we are 13 pages in, and he has not once quoted the Bible, which I find interesting, which, when I read chapter 1, this comes in more later. Because he doesn't quote the Bible too often in that either. He also doesn't quote... It's a whole thing. You'll see. Let's continue. He goes on to the quote, "Some Christians get duped into building secular utopia, which often makes them the tip of the spear against utopian's number one enemy, traditional Christianity." Again, most people on the left think you can practice any religion that you want as long as you aren't harming anyone. But also, can you explain how you can back Christianity if it goes against utopia, which is described as an imagined ideal society featuring perfect social, legal, and political conditions, free from conflict, suffering, and corruption? Again, obviously, utopia isn't real, it's imagined. But how can you say that being free of conflict, suffering, corruption, working towards those things, and having it being, perfect social, legal, and political conditions? Like, how can you go, no, we shouldn't fight towards that? How can you say, no, these things are bad? The idea that you can look at something saying, the best society we can possibly get, we should work towards this, and you go, my nose ring has been a little bit funky. And you can just go, nah, I don't want to work towards a better tomorrow. It's wild. It's wild to me. Oh, talking about wild. In pages 13 and 14, he talks about this wild 3-step left plan that makes no sense. It doesn't matter. In my opinion, it just doesn't make any sense. I guess I should actually read what the fucking 3 steps are. This is stupid. Okay, quote, "The game plan of the progressive left towards the utopian revolution is a 3-step process. They say something extreme that tears down traditional American and or Christian norms." Again, the US, not American. 2, the traditional Christians and or conservatives react by noticing and disagreeing. 3, the progressives say that our disagreement with their extreme rhetoric is extreme... stupid. Sorry, it's so fucking dumb. It's such a stupidly written thing. Okay. 3, the progressives say that our disagreement with their extreme rhetoric is extreme, divisive, hateful, and bigoted. The debate falls into what appears to be them versus us and the battle of cultural power, but underneath, this is a battle over truth. Like, what do you mean? This isn't about your opinions, it's about a battle over truth. What are you talking about? Like, when I say something, I try to be very straightforward and say exactly what I mean and as clear as possible. To my knowledge, no one else is playing this pretend 4D chess with John. It's just wild. It's just... No, because he doesn't believe in he doesn't believe in systematic racism. We'll get there later, very soon. I think actually very, very soon. So I'm actually warning you now. He doesn't believe in systematic racism. But if someone goes, hey, systematic racism is real, he would be like, whoa, that's extreme. When I say, or when someone says systematic racism is real, that is not to be extreme, and that is not to fight over this meaning of the universe. It's to go, hey, right here, right now, people are bad. Right here, right now, isn't great for some people. Let's do a bit better. And that's it. Just let's do a bit better. And then he's like, yeah, that's actually secretly meaning this. It's like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It means exactly what we say it means. And it's also really interesting that he starts out going, the U.S., he's American, but the U.S. and Christians, to then being the conservatives and Christians. But it's funny, it's weird that we're kind of hopping farther to the right with these ideas. Anyways, he goes on to saying that it's tyranny, and the particular tyranny that's like pressuring us and everything is the pressure to make you say things you don't believe, yet you were talking about, John, you were talking about forcing people to follow a religion that they don't believe. You are forcing people to follow your religion. Let's say again about abortion. You are forcing people to follow your belief that abortion equal bad. Yet when this tyranny of just saying things you don't believe in, that's the tyranny? Like that's... Also, you clearly aren't okay with that, or else you would have even the tiniest bit of nuance to people with different beliefs, but instead you say that it leads to tyranny. You say without following God, it leads to tyranny. The tyranny being that you can't say what you believe. So without God, it's tyranny, but then with God, you're forcing others to do and say what you believe in and not what they believe in. So it's not... It's like, I don't even know what to say, because it's just, there's so much that's like, that's not good or right. Like, I don't, Okay, I tried to make this a little bit better, a little bit more cohesive, a little bit cleaner, because he doesn't kind of lead in and just kind of drops it. He starts talking about police brutality, systematic racism. The topic gets introduced by talking about George Floyd, which is just a bomb. Like, it's like, I didn't expect it. Like I said, you open it and you're like, oh wow. Like, you open the book and you're like, oh, okay, we're doing this. Okay. So he said in the book that he, back in 2020, called out police brutality and said that someone needs to change something. This is correct. I went and watched half of a podcast of his. Let me see. Yes. So a podcast called Cooper Stuff. The podcast name was called Racism, Riots, and Really Confusing Times from 2020. And he did kind of mention the police brutality and how unjust the killing of George Floyd was. And great. I'm actually, okay, yeah, that's great. However, he didn't talk the most about it. It kind of was like, yeah, I disagree with that, but let's talk about this right here. And he's kind of pulling apart other things, which wasn't really good. I have a whole chunk of text here that I don't know if I want to go into all of it. I say here, first he mentions how violent they were, the Black Lives Matter protests. However, if you look into the stats, the protesters themselves were 94% non-violent nor had destructive activity. Yet, nearly 1 in 10 Black Lives Matter linked events were intervened by police or other authorities. And when responding, authorities used force more than 51% of the time. Force being firing less lethal weapons, like tear gas and or rubber bullets, all the way to beating demonstrators with batons. So it's not even, he's talking about how it's like, oh, but these things are so violent, like what all. No, just no, it's just incorrect. So he doesn't really mention how violent the Black Lives Matter protests were in the book. That was just in his podcast. However, in the book and in the podcast, he talks about how all right-wing media personalities spoke out about how appalling the actions that led to the death of George Floyd were. However, that's not true. I've seen a lot of people online, like a lot of people that are right-winged, saying that the cops, what they did was correct, how, George Floyd kind of deserved it. For example, Charlie Kirk, he literally said that George Floyd was a scumbag that wasn't worth the attention. Even Ben Shapiro, who previously called it obvious police brutality, has now since called to President Trump to pardon the cop, who was, by the way, sentenced to 22.5 years for Floyd's death. So, John isn't even right that all these people are against it. Oh, no one disagrees. But yet, here are 2 examples of people that did disagree. To the point of saying, no, that cop should get released. Also, there are a huge amount of people here in the US where I live. I have seen, at that time and forward, so many more, Blue Lives Matter kind of situations. I had personal people from my church going against saying Black Lives Matter because they didn't agree with that. They fully were racist. People are racist. Fun fact, you know this because you actually talked about, John, you talked about it in your podcast. You said that racism is a sin against God. So that's why it's bad. Just being mean and unfair to people, again, that I know we all have our little moral line like we talked about. For me, it's just being unfair and unjust, but apparently that's not good enough. You have to follow the Bible. Anyways, we're going to continue. Okay, we're going to continue. I also wrote that I'm glad John sees the need to better the police education and training, but for him, he doesn't seem to see that this happened because George Floyd was black. This happens so often that there are too many examples to list. This is a pattern. But John doesn't believe in systematic racism. So for him, he's never going to recognize this pattern, but it is kind of refreshing to actually see him being a kind of, not against the police, but against this kind of situation with the police. Because again, so many people aren't against the police, they were actually backing the police, saying that this was good and right and just. I also wrote that, by the way, halfway through, like right before I decided to stop watching this podcast because it's a whole thing. He clearly doesn't know what Antifa is. He does kind of say that he's against fascism, I believe, but he then goes and describes Antifa in a way that's like not correct at all. So anyways, I couldn't finish that podcast, so I went back to the book, and it says, quote, everyone had to say that it was racism, the death of George Floyd. As angry as I was about what happened to George Floyd, the color of Floyd's skin was not the issue to me. And like I said, that is the problem. He also continues and says, I was told that my hesitation to say this was 100% due to racism was proof of my own compliance to systematic racism. That's the thing though, John doesn't see the pattern of racism because he doesn't take issue to his skin tone. He doesn't recognize this is racism. And because he doesn't recognize as racism, he is in fact compliant to the systematic racism, the racism that is built into the system. Yes, even if you think racism is wrong, and it's not that you just don't see the racism, it's that you repeatedly talked about how you disagree that it is racism. You aren't even just going, I don't think it's racism. It's you podcast in the book, you go, no, this isn't racism. This isn't. But it is. People are telling you this, yet you don't take that in. So you are compliant because you are actively not listening to what people say. Then on page 16, he mentioned someone named Jordan Peterson. So I had to look him up on Wiki real quick. I wasn't going to do any bigger research than that for this guy. What I found on his wiki was he dead names and misgenders Elliot Page, calls Elliot Page's physician a criminal. And then there's when Peterson deleted his Patreon account in a public protest of the platform's controversial banning of an anti-feminist content creator, Carl Benjamin, don't know him, didn't look him up, don't care, for using racist language on YouTube. He is also Jordan Peterson. He's apparently a climate change denier, but he also believes in the redistribution of wealth towards the poor. So that was wild. Okay, we're going to keep going. And the book goes for like a few pages, just straight, of just talking about how bad other Christians are versus him. He also talks about how Christians are apparently preaching the Christian stories in ways he disagrees with because of like new modern takes on them. That's not really the point. However, it's interesting because he says, quote, "In my opinion, they are as followed." And again, no links to people actually preaching in this way, like actual Christians saying this. So it's not even confirmed. It's kind of just like, I heard other people are saying this. But I can't confirm that because, again, no links, no sources. Even if I could look into his links and sources, he doesn't have any of them. He literally just says, in my opinion, they are as followed. And then he continues with the book. On the next page, he says, quote, "I have written this book because I have been forced to. Apparently I'm not allowed to stay quiet." Wait, well, hold on. What happened to Jordan Peterson, like 4 pages ago, saying, quote, "You do not control my tongue"? The whole point of you bringing up the guy was to say that you're not in control of what I say, yet you are now saying that you are forced to write this book because being silent is bad. I thought that was you taking control of what you can say or not say. Like, okay, just, like, I don't know. Like, if you don't want to say it, like, And then for 2 pages, he talks about each chapter in this book fighting different utopia ideas because, again, apparently fighting for a better future is bad. And then on the next page, he talks about the meaning of the title of the book, which I didn't really think was important because it's kind of talking about Christianity for Christians, so I didn't really think that was important. And then he talks about how there's a coming revolution, and that it is presented as a war between the US, but in reality, the war is against Christianity. This is wild. How is trying to better our world anti-Christian? I know he goes on to say, quote, "Progressives believe that the Christian God and the Bible are to blame for all of societal's ills." But that's not even true. There are plenty of injustices in the US that people are fighting that has absolutely no tie directly to religion at all. And then finally, he kind of talks about why he's saying these things. So basically, he believes that the only way we will have a perfect life, the like actual true utopia, is when Jesus returns. But that's wild because, like, what, we can't even try to have a more ideal world? Also, doesn't that contradict what John said? Because he said that we should work towards getting rid of police brutality, but now he's saying that we shouldn't work towards a better future because there is no perfect future without Jesus coming back. But you also said we should try to fix police brutality, but there is not going to be a perfect future, so what's the point? So it's like, what? So which one is it? Should we try to fix what we're doing right now, right here, right now? Or there's no point because there is no perfect future. There is no perfect now. There would be no perfect earth because people are inherently bad. And without Jesus, there's no point. It's just another contradiction. But then he says, through the gospel of Christ, we can indeed make a better world. Okay, so the better world can happen, just not for people like me, nor for any of the LGBT community, nor if you believe in any other religion at all. Because those are going, apparently to you, to John, those are against the Christ that he believes in, the gospel of Christ that he believes in, because he talks about how any woke Christians are corrupted and aren't actual Christians, or aren't actually good Christians that believe in the true word. Because, by the way, he says if you do not follow his particular idea of Christianity, quote, "It ends in grievance, hate, tyranny, chaos, and mass death." Remind me how many people had died in the infighting of Christianity, you know, when different branches of Christianity would, you know, actually have war against each other. Does it remind me how many people got harmed because of that? So anyways, the pre-show is coming to an end, and he says, quote, "All I want to do is play music in peace, but since that is no longer an option, I will play music in war." You absolutely dumb fuck. How many anti-Christian laws, or not even laws, how many anti-Christian bills had been put forward in the last 10 years in the United States? By the way, not laws saying that you can't force people to follow Christianity. How many say that you can't be Christian? How many say that you cannot pray? How many say you actively cannot believe and be Christian? Now, how many anti-trans bills have been put forward in the last 10 years? Those bills saying that I can't transition, that I can't take certain medical steps, that I can't be who I am, something that is unchanging, something that I cannot fight. There was over 3,541. By the way, I didn't even count 2025 because now it's 2026, so I didn't want that to be confusing. But yet 2026 just started. I want to emphasize that technically is 9 years. In 9 years, 3,541 anti-trans bills. Some, by the way, in my own states were so unjust. They went against federal rights. Obviously, they were not even voted on. They were instantly denied. But there are people actively trying to put forward bills that were trying to become law, obviously. If you know the US system, you put forward a bill, you vote on it, it goes through a process, boom, it becomes a law. These people were trying to make a law that was so unjust, it went against my federal rights. Multiple, not just one bill, multiple bills in my state alone, which would have affected me directly, which was, I believe, the year that this book came out or the year before it. Those bills existed. Obviously, not all of them passed, but 3,541. You cannot honestly tell me that there was that much pushback to being anti-Christian here in the United States. It would just be false. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, people can be mean. People can physically bully, cyberbully you for being Christian. People also can be anti-Christian and can be rude. That's what people do. However, you are saying that this is a war. You are saying that Christianity is under attack, that it is a war on Christianity. That's not true. And the idea that you can see this, you know, these injustices, you can see these comments and say that it's a war, but you cannot look at the actual people that have died with police brutality, with systematic racism, people telling you that systematic racism in so many different things, which kind of we'll talk about a little bit later in chapter 1. I hope I remember to kind of get into that, which I will. I probably will. But you are looking at other people saying, hey, I have experienced injustice. And you're going, no, you're not. No, you don't. They're me saying how I have been affected, yet you're like, no, you're actually wrong. You're not following my Christianity. So you're wrong, and then moved me to the side as well. Yet here you are going, whoa, Christians are under attack, everyone. This is a big deal. We need to pay attention to this. It's wild that you can't see what you are doing. It is wild. And I don't know when this became talking to him directly. My notes are not into him, like talking to him directly, but yet here we are. It's kind of weird, but it's too late now. Anyways, and finally, the last quote, the very end of the pre-show, quote, "We must burn utopia to save the world." How can someone write that and think they're the good guy? How can someone write, you have to burn utopia and think they're in the right? That sounds like an evil line of like a cartoon villain. We have to burn utopia. Like, oh, again, utopia isn't real. People are bad. People do disagree. People are greedy and selfish. But again, how is working towards a more equal social, legal, political world with less conflict, suffering, and corruption bad? How can you say that and not hear yourself back and go, No, that's fucked up. That's wrong. Anyways, ooh, I just got so focused on this book, and I will need to talk about chapter one. Chapter two was like, okay, there's some stuff, but kind of leans more into like infighting a Christianity, which I probably will just add anything I want to say about that onto my next one, so it's just kind of two-part video. I probably won't actually ever obviously buy this book, but I probably won't ever read more into it unless I kind of really want to. Because the whole point was I wanted to hear what he thinks about especially LGBT people and trans people, because I saw kind of a vague quote from him when I looked him up that he's like, I love all trans people, hope they get the help they need, kind of deal. Obviously that's not what he said. You know, I love people that sin, it just, you know, they're still evil and bad and wrong and need to you know, change their life, or they're going to burn in hell forever. It was like, it's that. It was that. So I wanted to see more about that. I believe, based on just the title of each of the chapters, I think chapter 6 is called like Over the Rainbow. So I'm assuming that has to do with LGBT people. Again, it's not free. I can't find it free anywhere. If someone happens to have it, I'm not going to say no to a PDF of it, but I'm probably not going to commit to actually getting this book and to continue to read it. It was just, even in these first two chapters and the pre-show, it was just too wild to not talk about. So that is part one of these two parts. I'm going to just leave it here. My computer is not handling well how many tabs I have up to have done research for this video. His book is up, all the links I will ever put, all the my computer's freaking out, and I get that, and I'm sorry to it, and I'm sorry to everyone. It's wild. I had something else planned, and I didn't do it. I couldn't make a different video that I even wanted to make for years, because this has been eating at my brain so much that I had to just get it out. Goodbye.